I believe we should be live on Facebook, so you can share the broadcast on your pages. Good evening, everybody. Welcome, peace and blessings. I am Sister Rakaya. I'm here with Sister Sadiyah, Evangelista, and Brother Deric Muhammad. Brother Deric is an activist who has been fighting for the rights of our people for decades now. And Sister Sadiyah is an attorney here in the city of Houston, and also, I would say, an activist. She stands up for the rights of people whenever they call. I'll give a little personal testimony to both of these individuals. After my loss recently, both of them personally came to check in on my family and just helped me to find my footing again. It was a very trying time. Their hearts are pure, and I am indebted to them for the sacrifices they made to help me when I didn't think that I could keep going. And I think that that's what they do for our people on a daily basis. When we think that we can't keep going, they help us find the strength and find the resources and understand our rights. And that's a big part of this call today, is to make sure we understand our rights and we understand the true meaning behind social justice. So I'm going to turn it over to Brother Deric, and he can give like kind of his intro to social justice and his fight for justice for all people. Brother Deric.
First of all, assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and thank you so much for allowing us to be on your platform, Sister Rakaya. You know, I'm always fired up to be in the company of my comrade, Sister Sadiyah, Kareem, and I'm just happy to be here. Social justice. You know, you ask a question, what is the definition of social justice? I really don't know if there is a definitive definition to the term social justice, but you know, we're taught in the Nation of Islam to break words down. When you look at anything that is social, you're looking at that which deals with people and the way people interact, particularly within the various systems of society, political systems, you've got educational systems, economic systems, etc. So to have justice within the framework of all of those systems simultaneously, I would have to say that would be an achievement of what is called social justice. So it's not just about police brutality. It's not just about mass incarceration. Social justice covers the length and breadth of all human interaction. And I think the key to social justice is what they call the golden rule. The golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And to the degree that we can follow that law, we don't have very many problems in the way of social justice. But because we don't follow that law, social justice will always be a problem, and there will always be a need for social justice warriors. I hope what I said made sense.
Wow. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sister Sadiyah, anything you want to add?
And a part of that social, well, peace family, peace, Sister Rakaya. It's a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show, which is a very important and necessary show that we have, because you're bringing awareness and attention. And now people are listening where they once were listening. And so we have the ear, and we have a duty and a responsibility. Brother Deric and I, we've been in these streets for over 10 years now, almost 15.
Yes, ma'am.
On behalf of freedom, justice, and equality. I don't know, I was a baby, and I kind of grew up in it. We grew up in it, fighting for our people, because we see so much social injustice, and that's just in all areas of the life. Me specifically, when Brother Deric and we get together, we have a synergistic type of relationship, because I bring the legal advocacy to what we do. So where Brother Deric, you know, he knows how to have the ability to be able to confront those difficult situations, whether it be a senseless death of a little girl on behalf of her family members, or, you know, dealing with the educational system, as he talked about. It's so many areas that we've dealt with. And what I do is I bring the legal advocacy to it, because then I look at the rule of law and how it relates to the situation at hand, or what needs to be changed. Because what we're seeing is many of these laws are being broken on account because the moral compass of that particular law is not right and just at this dispensation of time.
Right.
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 Right. And so what do you think is happening with the moral compass? Why is it, I get that question a lot. Why do you think that Black people are so feared? Why do you think that police brutality, if we start there, has gotten to the point that it has?
You know, I was looking at the history behind qualified immunity. And so qualified immunity came into play about 1967. And so when you look at qualified immunity, you look at all the funding that has gone into the police department to really create a militarized organization, or the history and the implementation of the police department in its inception, you know, the history behind it. It was really to protect the plantation and the slave owners and their property, which that's what we were at during that time. And then as the civil rights movement came along and, you know, the sleeping giant awoke, we went back to sleep, of course. When the sleeping giant awoke and we started fighting for our human rights, then what you started seeing was these civil cases that were coming to the forefront against the police brutality, against these governmental organizations that were violating the rights of individuals. And so what the courts did and the Supreme Courts did is gave what you call qualified immunity. And it's kind of carte blanche saying that you cannot sue these individuals or hold them liable in their line of duty. So which gave the law enforcement and certain governmental entities and agents the ability to just violate people's rights and not have to pay the price for their violations, figuratively and literally.
Wow.
Right.
So go ahead, Brother Deric.
No, I was going to say I couldn't agree with Sister Sadiyah more. Anytime you want to study or decide whether you want to get behind or stand against the concept, you have to always study the origin of that concept. When you look at the origin of policing in this country, it's actually not that old of a dynamic or a concept. You know, the original police forces in this country were designed specifically to chase down, quote unquote, runaway slaves and return them to their plantations. That's literally the genesis of the justice system here in the United States of America. Now it's a little bit different. Even though police forces and police departments claim that they're here to serve and protect, what they're really here to do is to ensure that what goes on in the ghetto does not spill over into wealthy white communities. That's their job, whether they know it or not. And so the fear comes in, I believe, through conditioning. When you look at the types of movies that are put out and how Black men and boys are depicted in those movies, when you look at the nightly news and you may see 4 or 5 Black males having robbed a bank or something of that nature, and you see 0 Black males having won the science contest or won a chess championship, they always focus on the negative when it comes to our people. And over time, that's like a record playing over and over and over in the heads of the American people. So not only do law enforcement have an innately programmed fear of Black men and boys and Black women too, the entire society does. And it plays out in these police encounters, unfortunately.
Right. You mentioned earlier when I talked to you, Brother Deric, about like trying to get laws passed or things change with how police, the things that police are required to do, the trainings that they're required to do, and the difficulty in that process. If you can kind of give a little overview of what your experience is, and Sister Sadiyah, we talked a little bit, because like for me, I've been talking to a few police officers and I'm appalled at the fact that they are not taking psychological evaluations except for when they're hired, which is like 15, 20 years ago. and they experience trauma on a daily basis. And we know that trauma changes the brain, it changes your cognitive ability, and it changes the way that you think and the way that you process future events. So I can't understand why they aren't being evaluated more regularly. And then I also don't understand why they're not receiving cultural diversity or cultural sensitivity training. One officer told me he received it once when he was hired 20 years ago, and the other one said he never received it. So it's not even regulated state to state that they're required to receive those trainings. How do we as a people, because everybody's protesting, and I think protesting is great, but what's next after the protest? What do we do to move forward and actually demand and implement some changes? So if we wanted to get some laws passed to where police officers are required to have certain trainings, what would be the process for that, and what's your experience with that?
Well, there are some departments who have police sensitivity training. It's not a training that's mandatory, like, weapons training or something like that. But in those departments, you still have the same problems as you have in other departments. I don't know that sensitivity training works, to be honest with you. I do believe that if police officers were forced to undergo psychological evaluations at least every 2 years, that it may make a difference. But to be honest with you, now that the protests are dying down, we're hearing a lot of calls for legislation. But let me be straight up with you. After the death of Trayvon Martin, we had calls for legislation. After the death of Sandra Bland, calls for more legislation. After the death of Eric Garner, after the death of Alton Sterling, there were calls for more legislation. And I humbly submit this to everyone who's on that note. I don't have a problem with new legislation, but the reality is we already have laws on the books that protect citizens from abuse of authority when it comes to police officers. Many of those laws are already on the books. So these laws and these pieces of legislation are only as valuable to us as our ability to enforce them. The problem is that the laws are not enforced when Black people are the victims of this criminal behavior by law enforcement officers. So really, more legislation is fine, but at the end of the day, there is no substitute for justice. We have to punish police officers with the same type of punishment when they kill citizens that you punish citizens with when they kill police officers. There is no way around it. There's no piece of legislation that's going to excuse us from that. There's no sensitivity training that's going to release us from that universal law. There's no diversity training. There's nothing that you can do. You have to do right by people. And if not, the old adage, no justice, no peace. And the reason that the streets of America have had no peace in the past 2 weeks is because nobody has heard this cry for justice.
Right. Wow. So then what is the next step? Like, okay, so if they're not enforcing the laws, I know that there's been a big outcry for defunding the police. What does that actually mean, Sister Sadiyah?
So there's a lot of misconception about what defunding means. People are taking the word as literal as it sounds, taking away the money or the funding from the police department. But that's not what defunding really means or the intent behind it. So we know that the police department receives, I think I saw a number, New York Times reported $100 billion a year. The police departments across the nation are funded. Most of it is to militarize it. When we were dealing with the war on drugs under Nixon, under Reagan, under Clinton, under Bush, a lot of the funding went to create, a military. And I remember a couple of years ago, I went to Chambers County. I believe it was Livingston, Texas, Brother Deric. We had a case out there.
Right.
And it's a small county, small rinky-dink type of county police station, sheriff's department, but they had like 4 tanks out there and like 5 Hummers.
Right.
And when you go in, there was a wall of, I guess, former chiefs, police officers, and it had all police lives matter, which we understood that because that was after the inception of the Black Lives Matter. So we talk about the police departments or these law enforcement agencies have a significant amount of funding when they show up to the scene of a call, and it may be someone who have mental health issues, but they come bringing their guns and their bullets to deal with an issue that there needs to be some mental health training or a social worker that needs to show up. And so when we talk about defunding the police department, we're talking about taking funds away to militarize it and put it in a direction that is really going to serve the people who have drug addictions, who have mental health issues, as opposed to showing up, with the SWAT team and shooting before asking questions. And I understand there are certain situations where it does call for that, and I'm trying to measure my words very carefully. I have to, but a lot of this money is excessive.
Mm-hmm.
And we could use it and direct it in other areas that is going to serve us and protect us at the same time.
So then, in essence, defunding the police would still have, it would still be an entity. It would just remove some of the funding and redirect it.
Absolutely. So, for example, City of Houston just passed their budget, I believe it was yesterday, and Councilwoman Letitia Plummer had added some amendments to the budget. And a part of those amendments was, I believe, 169 vacant HPD positions. Nobody was in those positions. So she was wanting to take that funding and direct it somewhere else. And she got voted down. And so in that instance, there's nobody in those positions. Why not? You're just holding a place for officers who are not even there, individuals who are not even there. The mayor's argument was that we have such a big city and we need more law enforcement. So we need to create those spaces that need to be filled immediately. But we're seeing that's not helping at all either.
Right. What are your feelings on the defunding? Are you both in support of defunding the police?
I can't say that I am in either support or I know I'm not against it. But I can't say I support it yet. I'm still studying the concept. First of all, I would like to know, where did it come from? And
right.
like, where did it come from? Because what happens is we have very crafty individuals who introduce new hashtags and introduce new movements on the heels of our movements. And at the end of the day, they have their own agenda attached to it. Now, I'm down for taking millions away from these police departments who have literally turned into militarized occupying forces in our community. I'm with that 110%. But my thing is, what's the end game? What's the goal? See, there was a time when we were fighting very hard to make certain that all officers were equipped with body cameras. And at that time, that seemed like a pipe dream. And after the death of one of these high-profile martyrs who died at the hands of police, all of a sudden, what was once a pipe dream became something easy to do. Well, hell, what happened is somebody started selling body cameras and they ended up profiting from that idea. So I'm still studying the whole defund the police movement. But I really think that terms like defund, what else do we say?
Dismantle.
Defund the police department, dismantle, right? Defund, dismantle, reform, which is one that I hate. these are all defensive terms. And I think right now, as Black people, we need to go on the offensive. So yeah, let's defund the police department, but damn it, let's build our own department. And if whatever funds that they take from that department, use that to actually fund what it is that we're putting together.
Right.
So I think that's the thought process that we need to be in and be on. Let's dismantle the criminal justice system. Man, it's dismantling itself. We need to be focused on building our own conflict resolution centers in our community that serve as our own criminal justice systems where we can come together and solve our own problems. So I'm definitely not against defunding. I'm definitely not against dismantling. I'm not against that. All I'm saying is I think more of our energy has to be put into building.
Right.
And we have to use language that puts us on the offensive and not on the defensive.
Right. It's kind of like the quote that you said when the riots first started. You said, I see that we can tear down the city, but let's show that we can build one up. What was it that you said, Brother Deric?
Right. Exactly. And that was my way of saying, I'm not saying that protest doesn't work, because protests, if it were not for the protests, I don't believe those 4 officers would have been arrested by now. I'm sorry. I just don't think so. But Minister Farrakhan, when he was asked the question, does he believe that protesting works? He said, yes. He said, protesting is good for drawing attention to your issue. But after the protest is over, if you do not organize in a meaningful way, then the protest was useless. So I think now is the time for that organizing piece, not to organize on the defensive. Don't get me wrong. I do think that defunding the police is good, but let's have something to put those funds into that represents us policing our own community. Because if they shut down the police department and we haven't built something to put in place of it, let's just be real. We have a whole new set of problems on our hands. So now is the time to build. America is imploding. She's destroying herself. She really doesn't need any help. What we have to do is focus on building a nation within the nation.
Right.
Those are my thoughts on that.
Right. And when you say, like, having something built up to where, getting a little feedback. Do y'all hear that?
We can.
I don't know where it's coming from.
Somebody infiltrating.
Okay, but when you say, okay, so when you were saying that, have something to direct the funds to, it makes me think right now, that is so weird. One of y'all talk and see if it's still doing that.
So what we've seen, I've seen, especially with the protesters getting arrested, a lot of people want to donate to the cause. So I think Amazon donated 100 million to 10 different organizations. Amazon. This organization was able to raise $20 million for bail funds, and they stopped taking in money to divert it to other organizations. There's a tremendous amount of money right now that are going to a bunch of different organizations. Hell, even Black Lives Movement. What's the accounting on that? And how are they going to use that money to help organize where we are right now? And I think kind of interesting, I believe July 7th, we have a blackout, an economic blackout, a boycott. How effective are we going to be with that? So our buying power, our capital power, our economic power is tremendous. And right now there's such a flow. So, people want to donate to the protesters. Here in Houston, we had about 800 cases were dismissed. Now, the question is, how do we turn the bail money over that is not needed anymore, to get their records expunged, because now they got a criminal record, even though the case may say dismiss.
Mm-hmm.
And then using that money, take it and funnel it into something, an institution, an organization, or something that we can truly build in our community. And there has to be a separation. We can't ask, those who created the system that we're in to help us facilitate or organize on behalf of ourselves as well. You still over there struggling?
Yes.
Electronics on at the same time?
I think it might be some of my husband's phone because mine is cut off. But
tell Brother Damon cut his off and come
exactly. All right. So yeah, that's exactly where I was going with it too, is the funding. Where is all the money going? The legal defense, like if we don't have our systems together to where we already have something that we're missing out on that. You all have been doing the work for all of this time, but you're not getting the support that's being given by all of these corporations. I looked it up, not even just Amazon, Lululemon, Spanx, Levi, everybody is putting in $500,000 and more into the fund for Black Lives Matter or NAACP. But what is that money going to be used for? How can we strategize and organize to where we can at least make sure that the community's best interest is at heart with the use of those funds?
See, I need them to donate to the economic blueprint. See, in the Nation of Islam, we have what's called the economic blueprint that we pay into. And as little as $1, a week, you can pay into that. And we have individuals who $15 a year. I mean, what's the mathematics on that? That we can create our own institutions, we can create our own educational system, our own farms. So we would have to have a united, organized economic blueprint fund, which we already do through the Nation of Islam, economicblueprint.com, I believe, or .org. And let's start building our own institutions. We've already begun. The Nation of Islam has always talked about separating. We've always talked about doing for self or suffering consequences. And it's already there. But how do we pull it? And because we got so much going in so many different directions. I already know Black people are not going to see the light of day of that money as far as building institutions for us. And if we do, it's symbolic. It really would mean nothing to us.
Right. Brother Deric?
Yes, ma'am. I think white America is in apology mode right now. I think the CEOs of these Fortune 500 corporations had a conference call and they made a conscious decision that this is it. This is the time that they address the elephant in the room, and that is racism. They see the tide getting stronger and stronger. They see people taking back their power, and they are afraid of how it's going to continue to impact their bottom line. When we boycotted the NFL, they felt that. And they don't want to ever go through that again. When they saw cities in America on fire in the name of George Floyd, a brother who was literally considered a nobody to America about a month ago, they had to bow to the value of this Black man's life. And so what they're doing right now is they're trying to purchase our silence. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get a discount on reparations. That's what they're doing. I don't give a damn if you write a $500 million check. You owe us trillions of dollars. You owe us millions of acres of land for what our forefathers have gone through. And I really think in their minds, they believe that these contributions are going to wipe away 400 years of criminal sin. It's not. It is not. So the majority of the monies that are being donated are going to purchase people's silence. That's what most of it is going towards. It's trying to shut folk up, and they're trying to go on record to say that we are sensitive to Black life. We believe Black life matters, but at the same time, out of these Fortune 500 companies, there are only 4 Black CEOs. That's less than 0.8%. So Black lives matter, but our brains don't matter enough to you to where you think that we're qualified to lead your organizations. And so what I see is hypocrisy all up and down the board. It's just another tactic that they're using to try to get out of paying for what it is that their forefathers did.
So why is it so easy for them to donate these funds and not to start building a fund for reparations?
Well, to donate these, that's a very good question.
Like, it's millions of dollars being thrown into the pot saying Black Lives Matter, but we've been asking for since, our grandparents for reparations.
But this is a discount.
Right, because 3.9, that's right. Our economic power for 1 year is about $3.9 trillion. We're talking about a whole nation that could operate on its own. And when you look at the Black power, the Black buying power of us to give us trinkets right now and just to acknowledge us and our pain, it makes Black economic sense to do that.
Right.
You saw Congress pandering to us with the Kente clause, the bootleg Kente clause, taking the knee, and then the NFL commissioner acknowledged, kind of, sort of, but they did not acknowledge our brother who took the knee a long time ago. So, like you said, Brother Deric, it's a fad right now. It's a trend. They want to be on the record, as if to say, if we were looting out there and tearing up people's establishment, they're going to put on the outside of their establishment Black-owned business or Black supported, we support Black people, so you won't tear their stuff down. I was reading an article, I love CrossFit. The CEO of CrossFit didn't understand why we were making a big deal about the death of our brother, dear George. And he, made a joke about George -19, like COVID-19. And the affiliates who have what they call boxes or gyms for CrossFit, they wanted to know what he was going to say about Black Lives Matter. Was he going to support the movement? And he never mentioned it. And then he wanted to make a joke about it and didn't understand. He was tone deaf, but he was being honest. He was being true and real to himself. So what you found was Reebok, which is one of their biggest sponsors, and Rogue, which is one of their biggest sponsors of the CrossFit game. They decided that they weren't going to renew the contract because of his stance, his public stance against the Black Lives Movement or the death of George Floyd. So you're saying a lot of these corporations are punishing other people because they're not standing with them, but really they're looking at the bottom line.
Right. And Sister Sadiyah, as always, she was right on point. Think about it. Air Jordan pledged $100 million over the next 10 years to racial harmony or whatever, right? So that's $10 million a year. Well, that's a drop in the bucket when you consider what it is that he's made. Right now, LeBron James, who is sort of like Michael Jordan's competitor for the GOAT title, the greatest of all time. He's out there shooting jumpers with an I Can't Breathe t-shirt on.
Mm-hmm.
LeBron is standing up for his people. Michael Jordan has never done that. So Michael Jordan is afraid of the backlash that he would receive coming out of this George Floyd protest. And so this is good for business for him. You understand what I'm saying? If the NFL decides they're going to donate $100 million to some cause, some Black Lives Matter cause or whatever, that's a drop in the bucket to get their Black fans back. I mean, they'll probably make 3, 4, 500 million just this season alone if Black people co-sign on the NFL. So again, they're just looking at their bottom line. They're not putting any money into the pot that they don't expect to get back tenfold from Black people.
Right.
And so if you make sneakers, and Black people are the #1 consumers of sneakers, and we are, hell, if your competitor gives to Black Lives Matter, you're afraid that your competitor will do better business than you. So now you got to do. So you've got all of these people funding, like, to stroke a check to address, racial inequality. But what they will never do, they will never fund a program like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's program that they know will actually really free Black people. And our problem is we're looking to the very people that enslaved us to give us freedom. And that in and of itself is a sickness.
Wow. Yeah, look into the people who enslaved you for your freedom. And it brings it back to the whole Juneteenth celebration, because I know that's coming up. And I see everybody excited about Juneteenth. And I've been messaging people saying, do you know that you're celebrating the fact that we were finally told that we were free after we were legally free years before? And they were like, so it's so many people that don't even know that that's the origin of Juneteenth. And we celebrating it.
And Trump understood that very well when he decided to do his political campaign in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth. He got it. He understood.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, our people are a beautiful people. We're the most beautiful people that have ever graced the planet Earth. And I say it all the time, to be ashamed of being Black is to be ashamed of being beautiful. But the Bible says our people perish for the lack of knowledge. And right now that the protests are dying down in the streets, our people are grasping for straws because they don't want the momentum to end. More importantly, they don't want things to go back to normal. And that's exactly what these CEOs are banking on. They're writing checks to make sure that things go back to normal. But I didn't attend any protests, but as I watched on social media, our people were so empowered to be there for George Floyd. And I commend everybody who stood up. No matter what you did, God bless you for standing up for their brother and his children. But it got on my last nerves hearing so many Black people talk about how happy they were to see so many white people at the protests. It was as if you are happier to see white people standing up for your people than you are to see your own people standing up for your people. And all the talk about the allies, and I don't have a problem with it, because if there's a white person out there who wants to help, I really think they should. I actually think they have an obligation to do so. And many of them are, and I'm not making mockery of that. But what I'm saying is, even in our protests, even in our fight for justice, I still see the sick need to be validated by white people. And we have got to get rid of that. We got to get rid of it.
Right. Wow. I guess that goes right to the next thing, Sister Sadiyah, with post-traumatic slave syndrome, because isn't that like kind of a remnant of that? Isn't that a direct
absolutely real. So when we were talking earlier, we talked about the economics. It made me think of the Willie Lynch letter that was written by the slave master to the other slave masters, because we talk about Black people is good economics. Let's be real about it. And that's what slavery is all about, economics.
Right.
That's what we're seeing now in these donations. It's about the bottom line in the future. They're investing right now, right, for something in the future, and hoping that status quo would go back to what it was. Now, when we talk about the post-traumatic slave syndrome, you know, and the Willie Lynch, it was if you ever read the letter, and I suggest those who have not read the letter, read it. You know, the things that they would do to create the dissension between the different individuals, whether you were male or female, old or young, light skin, dark skin, it was there to create a hate. And then with the women and the men had to go through, you get the men who were the strongest. You use them as an example, like we saw with our brother George. You know, he you know, this tall, strong, beautiful Black man, and they knocked him down, and we all saw this trauma, and we heard him crying out for his mama. And so as women, when we heard this internally, I mean, we reached back to our ancestors and having to watch our Black men being tortured and killed. And as I saw a sign, when he called out for his mama, he called out for all the mamas. And you know, I finally took the time to watch the video, and I had to prepare myself to watch this trauma. And it has done something to us, but we keep watching the trauma over and over again. I believe there was another video that was posted today on CNN, and we continuously are experiencing all of the trauma that's already in our DNA, Sister Rakaya. And it has done something to us. And we know, Brother Deric, that injustice makes us mentally unstable.
Right.
We talk about mental health and PTSS. It makes us mentally unstable. And so we are in an environment that continuously makes us mentally unstable. And we keep on giving birth and passing down these genetic traits to our children with all of this trauma. And it has ignited us. But I'm telling you, Sister Rakaya, for me right now, Brother Deric, being sensitive to injustices, we are all open and vulnerable to what's going on. We can't help but to feel some kind of way.
Right.
It's rising to the top. And like, honestly, I've been getting calls to do shows, to talk about it, but I can't, because I don't want to literally lose my mind because of so much pain that not only am I feeling for myself, but I'm feeling for everyone else as well. And it's thick and it's real.
Right. Yeah, when I couldn't watch the whole video. I mistakenly watched about 30 seconds of it, and it traumatized me just a little bit that I did see. And just to see everybody standing around, and when you talk about the slave mentality, or, you know, and you think about the times that we were forced to watch each other during slave time being lynched, they would force you watch one person tied to two horses and in two different directions, or force you to watch someone hang from a tree, force you to watch the whippings.
I don't know if you can see this book. It's called Without Sanctuary. Without Sanctuary, and it's a lynching photography in America. It's a book comprised of pictures of Black men and women who have been lynched, and most of the pictures you'll see a group of white people standing around as a form of entertainment, and that is what it was then. And now we've seen it because of social media and cameras. That is a public lynching, and you see more and more of these alt-right, racist, KKK people coming forward, you know, and it's no different then as it is now. It's heavy. It's heavy. And
the only difference is now that it's televised for us, because everybody has iPhones or, you know, devices to capture it. Right now, people are looking at it as if it's happening more, but we just see it more. It's not happening more. We're seeing it more because we're capturing it ourselves. It's not from the body cams that we're capturing, that we're seeing the footage. It's from civilians on their cell phones capturing the footage, which is exposing what has been happening. And now we have to face it. We have to see it. And so now the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, Will Smith said that racism is not getting worse. It's just getting filmed.
That's right.
I say it's getting both. It's getting worse as it's getting filmed, and it's getting filmed as it's getting worse.
That's right.
And it's building up to a crescendo where America knows that she's going to have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And what you all said about post-traumatic slave syndrome, I think that's a very key point that many of us are missing. I accidentally watched the murder of George Floyd. I accidentally watched that video. Somebody sent it to me, and it was just organic. I'm watching it. I thought it was just a regular police, brutality video, another one. And I remember saying to myself, I know what I think is about to happen is not about to happen. And so it kind of drew me in, and I ended up watching the entire thing. If I've seen one police killing video, I've seen 100, 200, 300, which is not a good thing. But it messed me up for several days. And at some point, when I looked out at the so-called rioting and the uprisings taking place in Minneapolis and in other cities, I saw what I call trauma gone viral. I'm talking about millions of traumatized people acting, rebelling, creating social unrest because they're not even in their right minds right now.
Mm-mm.
They say that, psychologists say that when a person witnesses a murder, they are more than likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder. What's so dangerous about these videos is that you got millions of people witnessing these murders at the same time. So this is not just a police brutality crisis. You are creating a mental health crisis among just common people who don't even realize that they messed up in the head. And see, it's one thing for you to witness something like this, but you create a different level of trauma for Black people because we're the ones who are at the receiving end of the injustice that comes behind it. So seeing what they did to Alton Sterling, seeing what they did to Eric Garner, that messed us up just seeing the video. But then when we turn on the television 8 months later and see words not guilty, see, now you've heightened the level of that mental crisis. So we're definitely in the mental crisis moment right now. And there are a lot of people who tore up things for the past couple of weeks who could literally claim temporary insanity. And it is the fault of the American government. People are losing their minds. And if something is not done, like Nipsey Hussle said. Nipsey Hussle said that when a volcano erupts, it is very difficult to hold lava to a moral standard. So things will get worse before they get better if things don't get better. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, sir. And when you were talking, it made me think about the fact that we were already dealing with a lot of mental trauma because we're in the middle of a quarantine that's been going on for months. So it's like we can't make this up.
Well, Sister Rakaya, we were still in the quarantine. Don't get me wrong. We hadn't even come out of it yet. And then remember, we go straight into Ahmaud Arbery.
Right.
That case. Before we could even process that, we couldn't even process that case. A horrible case where this Black man was hunted down like an animal and murdered. White boy stood over him and told him, "Die, nigga," or something like that. Excuse my language. And before we could even process that, we turn on our phones and we see George Floyd.
Wait, Breonna Taylor.
Right. And so, yeah, trauma on top of trauma.
Yes. Yes, 3 in a row.
This whole damn country is one big mental institution right now.
And when you look at who's affected by COVID-19 disproportionately, the Black and the brown people. So then
Yes,
we are
ma'am.
dealing with our own personal traumas being taken out by COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
This was what you call a powder keg, a
Right.
perfect
Yes.
storm.
Right. And then for George Floyd to have had COVID-19, but that not be what killed him. That's pretty symbolic.
He
He
would be
was
recovering.
asymptomatic.
Right. I believe that Allah God allowed these things to happen to remind us of what the real pandemic in this country is.
And
The real
that's
pandemic in this country is a 465-year-old problem, a
right.
disease called white supremacy and racism. And let me say one more thing about the term racism, because we tend to call everything racism. But sometimes when you use the term racism, you're letting them off the hook. Slavery was not just racism. Slavery was 300 plus years of terrorism. Racism is not a crime. Terrorism is. Public lynchings, you can't just simply call that racism. Those were acts of genocide. Racism is not a crime, but an act of genocide in a world court, that's a crime. Plantation rape culture, you can't just call that racism. Plantation rape culture was torture on Black women, torture. Racism is not a crime, but torture is. So, yeah, they'll write checks to address racism. But is there a check big enough for you to write to address the terrorism, the torture, and the genocide? And so, yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but we cannot be fooled by any check written by any CEO. What they owe us is a whole lot bigger than a check. What they owe us is really this whole damn country for what our people have suffered.
Right. Like after the Holocaust, they got reparations, right?
Right. And they gave reparations to the Japanese as well. But you want to tell us that Black Lives Matter. Okay. We lost 100 million in the Middle Passage. They lost 6 million in the Holocaust. I'm saying that's just in the Middle Passage. That's, you talking about millions of bodies floating at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Now, with George Floyd, one thing I want to say about that before we move forward, because I know we're getting short on time. When they originally released the preliminary autopsy results, and they tried to say that it was not from asphyxiation, that immediately made me start thinking about cases like Sandra Bland and other cases to where we did not have video footage, but we only could go and rely on what they told us happened to the person. Is there any way that any of those other cases will be opened back up to determine faults?
You know, it's a possibility the family, you know, would have to ask for that to happen. And personally, I'm a part of the case where there was injustice like that. And there was an autopsy report that was just blatantly wrong. And so you see that time and time again. You got to remember that medical examiners work for the government. They're part of the system as well. They said what he had an underlying condition, an underlying heart condition. That's why it's important that we have legal advocacy. We talked about this earlier today, Sister Zakaya. You know, of all the attorneys in the United States, only 5% is African American. And we were talking to Sister Kiana today. We were going back and forth on social media, but we were talking about, as attorneys, how we get vested in our clients' issues or their matters, because we see ourselves in that predicament, in that space, because of our family members. And a lot of us financially can afford to advocate on our family behalf. But for others advocating on behalf of Brother George to get an independent autopsy, because that is going to be important in a lot of these cases. With the young brother whose organs were missing, Was there, uh, his whole body was hollow, and so we have a lot of that where the medical examiners are complicit in the conspiracy when we're dealing with these deaths of Black and brown. So legal advocacy is going to be important in that aspect. People in positions who have the ability to be a forensic pathologist to come forward and give their time. And it's not cheap. It's very expensive in the field itself, period. So, yes, I mean, there was even one case where I was a part of that the body was exhumed out of the ground because something was not right. When we talk about the financial aspect, a lot of our family members, they can't afford that type of legal help to be able to get the truth and the answer and the justice for all of these cold cases. When we look at these African American girls who go missing and there's nobody out there looking for them. Again, we're talking about social justice and the disparate treatment between the Black and the white. So, and then even in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where the people who were hunting him down were part of the DA's office at one point in time, investigators.
Right.
So as Brother Deric always talks about them investigating their own spots, or using the dirty mop to clean up a mess that they created. So
Right.
legal advocacy, social justice, and finance, is a part of that as well. And Brother Warren brought something up, Attorney Warren, when we talked about the economics, Brother Deric, Rakaya, and all the money that's been donated to all of these nonprofit organizations. Don't think from a tax perspective, they're getting a write-off. So it is no money lost to them. And these businesses that all of a sudden are looted and destroyed, insurance taking care of that. So there's no finance. They're going to be put back better than that they were before. Because some of this is an inside job that is blamed on us. Our beautiful sister, what's her name? Kimberly Jones?
Yes.
The analogy she used about monopoly in 400 years of having nothing on the board, and then we get on the board and you destroy what we have. I felt that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Sister Sadiyah. We cannot trust the medical examiner from the same county where the constabulary exists that didn't want to arrest the officer who killed George Floyd in the first place. In every case like this, we must have an independent autopsy done by a trustworthy medical examiner. And in cases where families cannot afford that, then something should be set up to help them with that. So bottom line is they are all liars. They are all liars. And they will go to great lengths to continue to try to cover their tracks. Yeah, so I agree.
Right. And I think we need to start asking a few more questions, and not just go on the emotional response when we're making the donations, to make sure that the organizations are going to do things like what we are laying out, what we're discussing, to make sure that the money is actually benefiting. Because I don't want it to be like, okay, so for instance, like with Hurricane Katrina, and everybody donated money to one entity, and then about 80% of that went to overhead and only 20% went to serving people. So a lot of times it's the grassroots organizations that are doing the footwork that are actually impacting the people, the hands-on work, and they're the ones that are missing out on the financial support to be able to do the work that they're already doing.
Well, I think that one of the reasons that they're writing the checks is because they're used to being able to control things with their money. It is their way of having a stake in where this movement goes and making sure that it does not come in their direction in an adverse way. So I think as a people, we have to be ready to move forward with great force without their money.
Right.
We have to be ready to fund and finance our own revolution. You cannot get to heaven on Pharaoh's chariot. It's just not going to work. And so none of this, let me just say 99% of this is disingenuous. But if the monies can be used to help real people, I say use the money to help real people. But I'm of the mindset that they're just trying to purchase our silence. And that won't work this time.
Right.
It just won't work.
Right. And I want to clarify, I was talking too in that last comment, there's a lot of civilians, individuals who've been donating to like GoFundMe's or different organizations. And I want us to be a little bit wiser in making sure that we're pooling our resources into something that we know is going to actually have a benefit and not just give us the good feeling in our heart that we donated something. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Got it.
Yeah.
On July the 4th, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan will be speaking. I guess some would say he'd be breaking his silence, if you will, because people have been asking, where's Farrakhan? We haven't heard Minister Farrakhan's, words. Well, on July the 4th, he'll be speaking. We want to invite everyone to tune in at www.noi.org. And, there is a cry among the people for justice and independence unlike never before. Common people are saying separation is the answer. Common people are saying these people have become disagreeable to live with in peace. Common people are saying we need our own land. You even got Black folk out here saying we need to go back to segregation because it appears that we were doing better on our own than we were having integrated with white people. And one thing that we can say about the Nation of Islam, it is not perfect, but everything that Black people say that Black people need during a time like this, the Nation of Islam is working on it. Land, our own schools, our own, I wouldn't call it a police force, but the FOI, a security force where we secure ourselves, our families, and our own properties. What the Honorable Elijah Muhammad built for us is almost like, I don't want to call it a pilot program because that makes it sound small, but a blueprint, if you will, for independence and salvation. So I think I know where I'm going to put my resources. I'm going to put my resources into that which is already working. And sometimes we say things like, we need Black-owned businesses. We need Black media companies. But in truth, we already have those. Right. The question is, are you supporting what it is that we already have? And so the Nation of Islam, by Almighty God's grace, has created a blueprint for what Black America could look like if we settled our differences, pooled our resources, set our egos aside, and made a sacrifice to build a better future for our children and our unborn grandchildren's grandchildren. So I'll be tuning in on July the 4th on NOI.org to hear the words of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, and I hope everyone within earshot of our voices will do the same. Right. You will thank me later.
Right. And what is the economic blueprint amount per year? I know it's like 5 cents a day, correct?
Yes.
Is it 5 cents? I think it's 5 cents a day.
5 cents a day.
Is it 35 cents a day?
No, I think it's 5 cents a day. So that's like 35 cents a week.
35 cents a week?
Mm-hmm.
That's 35. If it's 5 cents a day, that's 35 cents a week. I should.
It's 35 cents a week.
And so how much is that if someone wants to say, I want to contribute and I want to pay my year in advance? So say someone wants to pay a year towards the economic blueprint tonight.
That's $8.20.
A year.
$18.20. I'm sorry, $18.20. 35 times 52 is $18.20. So if we had $8.20 and we have 40 million Black people in America, let's see.
$18.20.
Right.
It's $20.
So,
yeah, just say
so we're talking about for 1 year, for 40 million people, $728 million a year to be able to build infrastructure for us, for a nation, farms, schools, stores, banks. That's 1 year.
Yes.
so if somebody goes on the NOI.org tonight, is there a tab where they can make the economic blueprint donation?
They can go straight to the economicblueprint.org and see what I typically do. And I don't even look at it. It's like I do an automatic draft through PayPal and it comes out of my account every month, $15. I don't even look at it towards that. Economic Blueprint .org, Muhammad's economic blueprint, ending poverty and want. Yes, ma'am. Just make it 100 and come on and participate. That's right, $100 a year, y'all.
Right. And I think right now everybody's in the mindset of looking for somewhere to donate, because they want to be a part of the solution. They see the problem, they want to be a part of the solution. Let's contribute to this because, like you said, Brother Deric, people have been saying, where is Minister Farrakhan? Where's somebody that I saw a post that someone said, where are the leaders at? And I said, Minister Farrakhan has been speaking on this for years. This is not new. This is not something that he's come out and give a response to. We can go and look at many of his speeches, and it already is addressing what's currently happening.
And if you look at the Savior's Day address in February, or at the end of February, I mean, he pretty much told us what was going to happen. And he's been telling us. And it's not like he's predicting, but the prophecy, we've been taught. So we know exactly, we're not emotional. We feel the pain. Let me say that. We feel the pain of our brothers and sisters who are hurting. But we're not in a panic and emotional and discombobulated because we know exactly what we're looking at because we're walking in the book. And we have been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan. And we know exactly what's going on.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I asked myself the question I'm just speaking on the biblical story in the Bible of Noah, right? When the rain started falling and the flood began to overtake people, I'm very sure that everybody was asking themselves, man, where's Noah? The answer to that question was, hell, he on the ark. But he preached for 150 years. Okay? So the time to seek out leadership is not before the crisis, it's not while the crisis is here. It's before the crisis comes so that you can be prepared for it.
That's right.
When it gets here. And so, but they've been asking the question, where's Farrakhan? I love the question. God willing, I think what this does is just tunes up our minds, our hearts, and our ears, and our minds, and our heads to hear the man of God on July the 4th, Independence Day. It used to be Independence Day for the United States of America, but I think we're going to take that over and make that Independence Day for us as a people.
Wow. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and close out, but I did promise that we would address a little bit about how to, I know police are on edge, people are on edge. So people who are interacting with the police, make sure that they are setting themselves up to make it out of the situation whole. So any last tips that you would want to give people if they are in an encounter, even if the police officer seems to be aggressive, what would your advice be on how to get out of the situation safely?
But Deric, I know we're both looking at each other because I can't tell you how many times we've traversed the city of Houston giving these seminars on how to handle the police. And it's a difficult situation because as much as we can tell you how to handle the police, the reality is, and I believe Sister Renee said this on her comments, we're dealing with the unconscious, conscious bias and racist mentality. So just like we saw with our brother, what's his name, Philandro?
Yeah, Fernando Castillo. Is that with the firearm?
Yeah, we can do everything right. We can show our
Right.
hands. We can address them in the most perfect manner as far as
Right.
respect for authority. And we're taught to respect authority as long as it doesn't conflict with our religion or kill us. But even in that, it still may not be enough in the reality that we're living in. I had a client call me today, as a matter of fact, who was detained by the police just randomly. So don't think for a minute that because what we see with Black Lives Matter and all the protests is what's really happening is they've been inflamed and angered even more. And their
Right.
senses have been angered even more.
Right.
So to desensitize it or to de-escalate any situations that may have, again, we'll always say respect authority, address authority, put your hands on the steering wheel if you're stopped, immediately stop. I can go on. I have a whole video on YouTube about what to do, the do's and the don'ts when being stopped by the police. And the instances where we've seen the protesters, and a lot of them are being arrested for obstructing the highway and the passageway. They could be on the sidewalk and they're being arrested. So my thing is, whatever you do it in a respectful and lawful manner. Don't argue with the police. Don't run from the police, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to fight your case in the courtroom as opposed to have to deal with your family burying you later on. So, it's sensitive times, and we have to be smart, strategic, and emotional. And the reality is, people are afraid. My daughter saw some police in front of our house yesterday and begged her dad not to go out to see what was going on. So all of us, the police and us as bystanders, we're all heightened. Our emotions are heightened. So respect authority. That's the best thing I can say right now.
And I think you said make sure that you remember that you fight the case in the courtroom, not on the side of the road.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No arguing. Why you stop me? Take your ticket. If they want to harass, and keep it moving. And then we'll deal with it for another day. Inshallah, be the will of Allah.
Right. Right. The key is to just simply make it home, to get up out of there. And even if your rights were violated, I mean, at least you make it home to call someone like Sister Sadiyah or myself the next day. But it's very dangerous right now dealing with inflamed, as Sister Sadiyah called them, law enforcement officers. The trauma that's taking place in this country is not just on the side of citizens, but police officers right now are traumatized themselves. They've never seen this many people completely.
Uh-oh.
We lost.
Okay, there you go. We can't hear him.
Completely and totally unafraid of them. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, most police officers police with their egos, and their egos are bruised now like never before. So just a few things. Number one, do not be afraid, because when you're afraid, that's when you make critical mistakes. Number two, be polite, even if you don't feel that way. You're not showing weakness. What you're showing is intelligence.
That's
When
right.
you say yes, sir, to a police officer, you're letting him know that you're giving respect with the expectation of having respect in return. That's not the place for you to yell FTP, F12, and no, we want you to make it home. It's dangerous out there. Another thing that I do is Sister Sadiyah is my lawyer, and I keep her business card on me all the time. So when I'm pulled over by police officers, when I hand them my driver's license, I also hand them her card. When I hand them her card, they know that they're dealing with someone who's represented by counsel. So keep an attorney's card with you. They're going to give you the card back. And another thing that I do is As soon as that officer approaches me and I can read his name tag, if his name is Officer Flowers, I immediately start calling him by his name. How you doing today, Officer Flowers? How can I help you? See, when he hears his name, you're letting him know not only can he identify you by face, I mean, you can identify him by face, but you can also identify him by name. Another thing that you should do is if you have your cell phone on you, which most of us do, when you get pulled over, call someone. Have that person on speakerphone. Just have them just listen in. That way that officer knows that you're not alone during that police stop. You have someone who's listening as well. So those are just a few of the quote unquote tricks of the trade that I use to get in and out of there. But another thing, and I think this will call for another show. If you've done all of that and then some to try and prevent a violent encounter with a police officer, and that officer attacks you anyway, you have a right to defend your life against anybody, whether they have a badge or not.
Say that. And I would like to add with the recording, make sure whatever you're recording is on a cloud. Officers will destroy your phone or they'll try to erase it. If you can Instagram, Facebook, if you feel there's some kind of escalation, or if you have like Google has all kind of clouds, make sure that you put it on the cloud.
Wow. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Thank you guys so much. Wow. I'm just trying to absorb, especially that last part. We're putting it on the cloud. I never thought about that. Never thought about that. But thank you so much for everything. I know we were a little bit over time tonight, but we had a lot of good feedback and people saying good tips. I just want to say a few things. A few people posted. A few people said they had no idea about the economic blueprint plan. So good thing that we shared that.
So with that, Kaya, my suggestion is for everybody to get Message to the Black Man by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And in there, he talks a lot about doing for ourselves and the economic blueprint.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Do for self. That's a whole nother show right there. So thank you so much. Any last words, anyone, before we sign off?
Thank you for the opportunity. To your viewers, keep studying, keep being aware. But your organization is going to be the most powerful thing that you can bring to the table in this conversation. So let's organize and do for self, so we don't have to suffer the consequence.
Yes, I want to thank you, Sister Rakaya, for hosting us. Thank you, Sister Sadiyah, for always being an inspiration to myself and to our community and our people and to the world. The only thing that I would say to my people is, coming out of the George Floyd protest phase of this fight, please do not lose any steam.
We can see.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Make a commitment today that this won't just be a moment, but a movement that you turn into a lifestyle. So whatever your gift is, whatever your talent is, whatever your resource is, decide right now that you are going to be a willing worker, an essential worker, if you will, in the fight for the cause of the liberation of your people. Paul Robeson said it like this. He said that the battlefield is everywhere. So no matter what it is that you do, whether you are a lawyer, a journalist, a writer, a poet, an activist, no matter what it is that you do, you have to find a way to use that as a way to lift your people, make a lifestyle out of it. And I think we'd be on our way to freedom if we would all do that.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, family.
thank you. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, for tuning in. And like they said, don't lose steam, don't lose hope. Keep fighting and keep studying and preparing because it's not over.
That's right.
Thank you.
And the
All
message
right.
is our unity is as strong or more powerful than an atomic bomb. So we have to be united.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Okay.
Peace.
Thank you so much. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Islam.